Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I want to say good morning to all our parliamentarians, and a special good morning to Senator Jean-Pierre, who I'm happy to know that he's here with us, and wish him all the best as we continue today, that he's in great health. Madam President, the motion before us is a motion that seeks to borrow about 21 million EC dollars as a loan that, as was described by leader of government business, to back up, so to speak, a grant. And that is for the construction or the rehabilitation of the Millennium Highway. Madam President, I think it is very clear that not only the opposition, but every St. Lucian will be happy to know that any government is building roads or rehabilitating roads. I have not heard anybody, including the opposition, who would be against road construction. That is not the issue. So, Madam President, from the onset, I want to make it very clear this morning that my submission, and that I represent the opposition, is not about whether or not the government or any government should build any road. That's not the issue. The issue, Madam President, is deeper than that. And if I may just use the analogy that the Honorable Senator Mangal used to suggest that the reason why we are taking this loan now is as if it's as an analogy similar to one where you desperately need to back up a grant of $100,000. The analogy that you use that we're all familiar with by now. I think, Madam President, that is actually the issue. Because I asked, first of all, in his analogy, the point was being made, and that I think is the essential argument the government has made, that this thing is necessary and it is desperately needed. So, Madam President, I ask, what is the desperation? While we believe that every road that has to be constructed in St. Lucia is a good thing, what is the desperation that the government is attempting to establish with this particular loan at this particular time? So, Madam President, I'll tell you what I believe the desperation is about. Madam President, I think the desperation is about elections being around the corner. There's no if and but about it. In 2 days' time, the government would have served 4 years in office on Saturday the 6th of June, 2020. It will be 4 years since the government has been elected. And constitutionally, we all know that elections are due very shortly. So, Madam President, all this talk about we need roads and all the technicalities, that is not my line, and I will respectfully not go there. But I will say, Madam President, that the issue is why now, and what is the desperation about taking this loan now and doing this road now, especially since that $100 million that was mentioned has been available to the government from 2016. It has been available. The government made its decision. It chose not to pursue the road construction at that time. And now it's making it look like this thing is so urgent that we must do it now. So the opposition, and I'm definitely not saying, Madam President, that the road should not be done. As a matter of fact, I'm saying that the road ought to have been done already. Yes. If it was such a desperate situation that we try to use an analogy to compare it to somebody getting to build a house. It was so desperate, why didn't you do it before? So the point here, Madam President, is why the desperation? And the desperation is very clear. So right now, Madam President, the government is crazy doing roads, and you might think that the Millennium Highway Road is the only road. But just to extend on that, Madam President, there are many others. Roads, Madam President, roads. Millennium Highway Road. Yes? Spring Road. That is desperation too. In Deriso. Calypso Road, Blanchard. And roads to people's homes and so on, Madam President.
Senator.
You understand? Yes, Madam President.
You know that I will ask you to stick to the debate at hand, and it is about the Millennium Highway and West Coast Reconstruction Project. So we don't need to go into all the other roads.
Absolutely. So, Madam President, here is the point. I don't believe that it is correct and fair for the government or any member of the government and try this borrowing now on the basis that this thing is absolutely necessary right now. And even to try to infer that because of the COVID situation, this is what we have to do. Because there are lots of other things that we ought to be doing. So, Madam President, it appears also that in this Honorable House, we are not supposed to say that this project, this Millennium Highway Road, is a campaign project. We're not supposed to say that. Yet, the very same government is going all over the place, in their yellow shirts and so on, you know, asking people opinions about the works. But we're not supposed to say it's campaign. So let me move on. Now, Madam President, as in any other project, when the government seeks to borrow money, the taxpayers' money, to build a road or to do any other project, you would expect that there'll be provided to the taxpayer about what is going on. And in this case, Madam President, the government is expected to tell us how we're going to spend that money. While we agree that there has been a grant, but we're borrowing over $20 million. But, Madam President, up to this date, with all that has been said, including our two government senators this morning, no one has told us what the cost of the road is. What is the cost of the road? What value are we getting for money? What is the value for money that we're getting? And mind you, I'm not going to get too technical like my colleague. I'm not an expert on engineering and so on. But these are basic questions that any St. Lucian would need to know. If you're going to take tax money to borrow, to engage in a project, you tell people what the project costs. Right? Especially since you've already tendered. Madam President, I also would like to know how the contractor selected. Yes, tendering, but there's that we are about to borrow the money. So, Madam President, I should not have been standing here this morning to ask these questions. And it has happened before that the opposition and civil society and St. Lucians always seem to be being forced to ask questions that the government ought to be providing the answers for upfront. So I think that if the government doesn't want or doesn't like to hear us asking the questions, just provide the information upfront. And that will be fine. Madam President, there is something that I for some reason, in all of the discussion, that I have not heard much discussion about or much talk about. So I want to raise it this morning. From June of 2017, actually it was July of 2017, I remember coming to this Honorable House to debate the imposition of that was changed from $2.50 to $4, the $1.50 extra, and we were told that this money would be collected on fuel, on every gallon of fuel, and go into a lockbox, and it would be specific to road construction and so on. Madam President, I remember the debate went back and forth, but the tax was introduced, and remember it was in July of 2017. So in 1 month, Madam President, it will be 3 years since we've been collecting that money. And just by basic math, the calculations would suggest that in 1 year, the government is actually collecting around $20 million, in an additional $20 million from that tax. So it means that by July of this year, the government would have collected about $60 million based on that gas tax calculation only. So, Madam President, I am asking today, if the government justifies the increase of the gas tax and indicated to the population that we are doing so and we are putting this money into a specific, or is designating that for a specific purpose, in a lockbox to do roads for the country, for the people of this country. Why is it that today we have to come here and borrow $20 million, that's about 1 year of that road tax, to do the very same thing that the lockbox money was supposed to do? So where is the lockbox money that we've been collected? Well, Madam President, you don't have to be any expert in anything to make sense out of this. This is basic logic. And I want to repeat that in Creole. Madam President, depuis juillet 2017, le gouvernement est venu en Parlement et puis passé en loi pour aussi pour le gaz et puis $1.5 à sous chaque gallon gaz. Et le gouvernement a dit nous supposons supporter ça parce que l'argent ça là, calé dans ça y a un lockbox. Ou ka mettre dans boîte ou ka la clé. Et pièce l'autre service pour l'argent ça passer pour faire chemin. Nous dit oui, nous dit non, nous dit bête ça, l'on a passé. Depuis 2017, le gouvernement a point $1.5 à sous chaque gallon gaz. Pharma, pêcheur, toute qualité dans cette liste pour faire chemin. Ça a venu $20 millions par l'année. Madame Président, en juillet, l'année ça là, il y a 3 années depuis le gouvernement qui a point l'argent gaz ça là. Ça a venu $60 millions pour 3 années. Vous voulez dire, moi, Madame Président, le gouvernement ça là même qui a venu aujourd'hui, et puis vous voulez moins supporter. Vous avez presque amassé $60 millions pour faire chemin. Et que vous avez dit moins. Vous avez gardé moins et que vous avez gardé nous et que vous avez dit nous. Vous voulez nous prêter $20 millions pour faire même bagaille là. Question à moi qui m'a dit, Madame Président, côté l'argent que vous avez amassé pour mettre en groupe ça là, à boîte ça là. Qui ça qui arrive boîte là? Est-ce que j'aimais la clé? Madam President, this lockbox thing, I don't know if it has ever been locked, Madam President. I am very suspicious of it. So, Madam President, I think the question has to be answered. This is a basic situation and it doesn't require so much analysis. It's simple. And every single St. Lucian can understand that. So, Madam President, having said that, I want to move to another point. I want to ask, Madam President, that the government seems to also be suggesting to us that the only means of stimulating economic activity in this COVID environment is by what has been described as asphalt, concrete, steel, and those types of projects. And we know that there's a certain limited amount of scope when you have projects like that as far as generating employment and economic activity. That has been explained by the more expert people, so I don't want to go too far into that. But what I want to ask, Madam President, is what is the social impact of that kind of project undertaking? Because we tend to forget that in our revival or in our, in recovering from COVID, that is not just about economics, pure economics. You have social implications that we have to deal with. You have socio-economic situations that we need to address because of the situation of the COVID environment that we talk about. So, Madam President, projects like these, while I am minded to say that no one, and I particularly have never said and I will never say that you cannot do roads and construction projects. What is it that we are communicating when all we want to do is build roads? So, Madam President, again, I believe that we need to reconsider our priorities at this time. We need to. And I also want to find out whether in our social conscience that we were not better off diverting our attention and channeling our recovery to include other sectors, other vulnerable groups. And I think I've mentioned that before. Sourcing learning tools for students at this time. We're busy borrowing millions of dollars, for roads. We're busy doing that. And I can see the economic impact to some extent, but very little. But there's the social and socio-economic impact. That is not important. And we have a former minister in the Ministry of Equity here. We have to be conscious of that. It's a holistic situation. The country doesn't exist in a vacuum. All the various subsectors have to come together for us to recover. You can't just take care of one aspect of the economy and think you're doing well. We have to develop the entire economy. And we have to develop the entire population in the recovery process. So if you want to come here and justify road infrastructure as your panacea for dealing with that, I am saying that's not enough, and that's not the way to do it. It has to be in a more holistic and comprehensive way. So, Madam President, I want to move to my final point, because I wanted to be very precise this morning, and I think there's just one more thing I need to say. Madam President, the government has made some utterances that do not match their spending habits. I take my time about this. We've heard quite a few utterances in the last few weeks, including the explanations provided for this borrowing, that do not match the government's spending habits. We have been told to tighten our belts as a country because we understand the crisis we're in. Tighten your belts. If you were spending $50 buying drinks and liming, cut it down and be more responsible and be more fiscally conservative, so to speak. And I think that is good advice coming from the government to the people of St. Lucia, because things are hard. But while the government is telling us that, Madam President, they are doing the direct opposite. It is not reflected in their behavior. This is a time where they're going out to borrow and to borrow and to spend. And I'm not saying that they can't borrow and spend because they committed. But what are you borrowing and what are you spending on? You need to be consistent. If a father tells his child, son, when I send you to school, I give you $1. I don't want you to waste it on junk. But his father is wasting all his money on rum. You think that son is not going to read through what the father is saying to him? Set the example, Madam President. The government has to set the tone. Don't tell us to tighten our belts, And Madam President, with all that belt tightening, if we tighten our belts any further, we won't be able to breathe. And these days, I can't breathe is not a very popular term. So I don't even want to use it too much in this honorable house. Madam President, we need to stop that. We need to be consistent, and we need to set the example. So while I will emphasize that this side of the house and good thinking, right thinking, honest St. Lucians will never be against any government borrowing money to do infrastructure projects, we must ask a question to this government. With all that we have heard, is it that this has become such an urgent matter overnight? For 4 years, you had that ability to do it. You had the loan, the grant was available to you. You had all that you know now. You didn't. But now it has become urgent. So urgent that you are prepared to, to put everything aside to do it. All the things that you gave priority before in the last 4 years, you need to rethink them and ask yourself whether you shouldn't have done them instead, and whether you should not have done this instead. So, Madam President, with all the roads that we need to maintain, with all that I've heard, and with all the arguments that have been provided, I believe that at this time, I cannot stand here and say I support this thing wholesale. No. I say that it should not be the priority at this time. It should not be the way in which we should be investing our resources at this time. And I believe, I will repeat, I believe it is, the desperation is that it's a campaign project around the corner. The government is busy doing all kinds of things. That is what it's about. That is the desperation that we are hearing about. And so on that basis, I will not be giving that project the kind of support that I would probably have if it was done genuinely when it ought to have been done. So, Madam President, I submit this as my small contribution to the argument this morning.